Hello, I'm Paul Perrello, and welcome to the Philly Factor. I'm really excited about our next show. You know, we as Philadelphians really have this great heritage of music here in our area, a heritage of music that really is known not only across the country but around the world. Long before the legendary sound of Philadelphia was born and nurtured by the creative geniuses of Gamble and Huff, there was the street corner harmonies of doo-wop, there was local radio disc jockeys playing rock and roll, and of course, a legendary television show in Philadelphia that introduced us all to the hit music makers of the time. And Philadelphia was pretty much at the forefront of it all. Philly Pop, Rock, Rhythm, and Blues is a new book by author James Rosin. Joining Jim is truly one of those legendary entertainers. We have with us here the one and only Bobby Rydell, and I want to welcome both Bobby and Jim to the program. Thanks, guys, for being here.
Thank you so much, Paul. Pleasure.
We'll get to you because your career, we could go hours. We have a marathon here, or a telethon, when it comes to Bobby's career. But Jim, I want to say what a wonderful job you've done with this book. And a lot of people will think of Philadelphia music, and they may think about the sound of the 70s, that sound of Philadelphia. But as I said in the open, really the tapestry of Philadelphia music goes way before the sound of Philadelphia.
Oh, sure. It goes back to what Louis Jordan when he came to Philly and started to inaugurate the jump blues. He was the architect, I guess, between the R&B movement that came later and the big band sound with this jump blues. The book gets into the 50s, all of the pop singers and bandstand with Bob Horn, and then by the mid to late 50s, we have the onslaught of all the rock and roll artists and the pop artists, and then Cameo Parkway, and then of course the English come over here and invade our country and create havoc, and then we have a chapter about Philly during the British invasion, and then there begins to be a rhythm and blues movement that bubbles under, and then on comes Gamble and Huff and Tom Bell. Tom Bell, people don't realize he worked with Bobby at Cameo Parkway, the musical genius.
Yeah,
and he was so much a part of that movement, Sound of Philadelphia.
Yeah. You know, when Jim mentioned Bob Horn and Bandstand, I saw the smirk on your face because a lot of people think of Dick Clark and Bandstand, and they don't know that before Dick Clark, it was originally Bob Horn.
Originally it was Bob Horn. Unfortunately, he did a lot of stupid things.
Yeah.
And he could have became the Dick Clark, but unfortunately he went sideways, and all of a sudden there was a guy at WFIL going, "This is WFIL TV 6 in Philadelphia, who was Dick Clark." And then all of a sudden it became Dick Clark American Bandstand.
And of course, your career sort of takes off when Dick Clark's Bandstand really goes mainstream, if you will. It was no longer this small town Philadelphia television show. It really had gone national when not only people in Philadelphia, but people in California were hearing Bobby Rydell.
Absolutely. I mean, my first hit record was the summer of 1959, a song called Kissin' Time. I had 3 records before that for Cameo, which later became Cameo Parkway, and they all bombed, did nothing. But Dick was basically here in Philadelphia, Jim, for 3.5 hours, and then all of a sudden, bang, it went coast to coast. And you saw Dick Clark, American Bandstand, from Philadelphia to the West Coast, California. And I mean, if Dick played your record and the kids loved it, it started jumping on the charts. Cashbox and Billboard would look at Dick Clark to see, what he was playing.
Yeah, and while Jim, Dick Clark more or less gave credence and credibility to a lot of the artists here in Philadelphia. If we can even go back before, I guess, Bandstand, there was a guy that was from Michigan, whose parents and himself, they moved to Chester, Bill Haley, that really may have launched this whole phenomenon known as rock and roll music in the early 50s, right?
Yeah, that was very interesting. They had filmed a movie called Blackboard Jungle in LA at MGM. The director was Richard Brooks, who was a Philadelphian, went to high school.
And Vic Morrow.
And Vic Morrow, he went to, Richard Brooks went to high school with my dad, and he was looking for some music for the movie, and he was visiting Glenn Ford, who starred in the movie as the teacher, right?
Right.
Anne Francis, Vic Morrow, Sidney Poitier.
Yeah.
And Paul Mazursky was in it, that later became a director. And he heard Glenn Ford's son Peter playing this song, Rock Around the Clock. He had bought it at a record store in Beverly Hills or Wallach's Music City on Sunset Boulevard, and it was the flip side of it was 13 women and only 1 man in town was really the A side.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember that. Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it did
13 women?
and only 1 man in town, something like that. I hope I'm right because we're taping this.
Wow.
And that was the B side, rock. We're going to rock around the clock, and then this film came out, and Richard Brooks decided to use this, borrowed the record from Peter, went back to MGM, listened to it with assistant director Joel Freeman, and said, "This is it." And when the movie came out, kids were dancing in the aisles.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it exploded. It was about a movie about what they call juvenile delinquency. Right,
Absolutely,
in the 50s.
yeah. And Vic Morrow was like, the street neighborhood tough guy.
Yeah, that's
you
right.
know.
Yeah. He pulls the knife on Glenn
Pulls
Ford.
the
in
knife
end,
on
yeah.
hate teach.
Yeah.
You know, right? Yeah.
And the song became a worldwide hit.
Ooh.
And I remember jitterbugging at my brother's bar mitzvah to that song, and it really spearheaded the whole movement. And then all of a sudden you had the Everly Brothers, and you had Jerry Lee Lewis and
Fats
Domino, and you had and Charlie Gracie, of course, with Butterfly, 3 million copies.
Yeah.
He
On
knocked
Cameo.
on Cameo.
Yeah. And Bobby, you recorded with Cameo, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. And so here you are, a kid growing up in South Philly. Your father's taking you into, was it the Earl Theater in town, and you would listen to these performers play?
My dad loved big bands, and I must have been, Paul, maybe about 5, 6 years old. He took me to a Saturday afternoon performance at the Earl Theater, located 11th and Market Street, and it was the Benny Goodman Band.
How about that?
And playing drums for Benny Goodman was Gene Krupa. And I'm 5, 6 years old. I said, I don't know who he is, Daddy, but I want to be him.
Wow.
I want to be that guy playing drums. And I started playing drums when I was about 5, 6 years old. And it all started, with that. And Bernie Lowe, who later became the president of Cameo, which later became Cameo Parkway, I was on a show here in Philadelphia, emanated from the old WFIL studios, TV6 on 46th and Market Street. It's called the Paul Whiteman TV Teen Club. And it was the Paul Whiteman Orchestra, and it was a show that gave young talent a chance to get a break in the business. Who's playing piano for Paul Whiteman is Bernie Lowe.
How about that?
I was 10 years old. 17 years later, he became my boss at Cameo. Yeah.
The book reads as a who's who, not only in Philadelphia music, but you look at many of the photos and many of the stories that you've included in your book, Jim, like Bobby's story, and also these other guys that grew up in South Philly, like Fabian and Frankie Avalon and James Darren. I mean, these are guys that grew up in South Philadelphia, went on to launch national careers, but they were just 4 of the many people in Philadelphia. I mean, and you got to wonder, you got to pause, and Bobby and I were kiddingly talking about this. And, what's in the water here? Why is Philadelphia on the music landscape this way when it comes to the talent that has put the Philadelphia music scene on the worldwide stage?
Well, as far as neighborhood, I would, respectfully yield to Bobby because he grew up in South Philly. My mom is from South Philly, but I didn't grow up there. I grew up in North Philly, and he could really tell you what life was like. But what I got from him and my mom and Bobby's mom when I talked to her once in Wildwood, and Jimmy, Darren, that it was like a little Hamlet, and that when your friends who played musical instruments went to the club and performed, it inspired you. Mm-hmm. There was no jealousy or envy. It was a different time, right?
Right, absolutely.
And there was not a lot of choice and alternative like we have today at that time, and so musical instruments was a big thing. And that inspiration carried a lot of people into musical careers.
You're talking about when you talked to my mom in Wildwood, New Jersey.
Yeah.
And there was a club in Wildwood right on Atlantic Avenue called the Rainbow.
The Rainbow, yes.
And there was a group playing there called Georgie Young and the Rockin' Box.
Rocks, yes.
You remember?
Yeah, yes.
And Georgie Young was a marvelous reed player. He played alto, tenor, baritone, soprano sax. It was a marvelous, and the band was cooking. I used to stand outside. I was like 14 years old, and I couldn't get into the club, just listening to the like shuffles, you know, and lo and behold, I record my first record for Cameo called Kissin' Time. Who's playing the alto solo? Georgie Young.
Yeah.
It's not what you know, it's who you know. It
I
seems
know,
like,
yeah,
right?
and you know, and I did a show. This is quite a few years ago at the old Mount Airy Lodge up in the
Wow,
Poconos, and my drummer, who rehearsed the band, said, "You're going to be surprised tonight." He said, "Guess who's playing the lead alto?" And you know, I don't know, Gene Quill. You know, I don't know. He said, Georgie Young. I said, oh my God. So anyway, we do the show, and I just wanted to fake a tune. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to have this gentleman play solo on this particular tune. And we did I've Got You Under My Skin in the key of E flat, which you go like this. That's a signature for E flat and musician talk, right? And Georgie Young played the solo, and he was absolutely marvelous.
Yeah.
You know, you know, just things that happen in the business. You kind of run across people you haven't seen in years,
Sure.
and it's just a wonderful feeling. It really is, Paul.
And Jim has really captured the essence of many
Oh
of these
my
stories
God,
in his
Jim's
book.
the best.
You know,
Well,
as I
thank
said, it really, you know, just the photographs alone,
Yeah.
and, you know, being a radio guy myself, I was intrigued to see a photo of Grady and Hurst at the old WPEN studios with Frank Sinatra.
Sinatra,
And
yeah,
I'm
that's
like,
a great
wow,
one, yeah.
that is a great picture.
Yeah, Ed gave that to me.
Yeah. And just you know, many of the snapshots that you could find in the book. Then I guess as we transition from this era where Bobby and his colleagues had honed their musical skills and took the national stage, you know, we transitioned into the 70s. I mean, we had the British invasion, and lo and behold, come Gamble and Huff, and that's when that sound of Philadelphia is really created. That still resonates, you know, today. I mean, you know, while Gamble and Huff may not be producing records, you know, their music is still part of the,
yeah.
you know,
It'll live on forever.
sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I think, you know, the old Cameo was on 1405 Locust Street. I think it was a Sunray drugstore, and you went up 14th floor. That was 1405. And then I think Gamble and Huff, they went further south on Broad Street
Right.
with their studio,
Yeah.
right?
That's where they are, yeah.
And that was an old Cameo studio as well.
Yeah, 309
That when
South
Cameo
Broad Street.
kind of like, you know, went under, and that was all because of I'm losing it right now. A gentleman from New York who bought all the Cameo masters.
Right.
Alan Klein. Alan Klein, who bought everything that was ever recorded on Cameo. But then Gamble and Huff went from 1405 Locust to somewhere on Broad Street.
Yeah, I think it's 309 South Broad. It's
309,
across
that
from the
sounds
Kimmel
familiar.
Center.
Yeah,
is it?
exactly.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right, Jim. Yeah.
And boy, how the music industry not only changed when it came to the inner workings of the business, but even like an artist for yourself, Bobby, at one time when you went into a recording studio, it would oftentimes take hours to lay down the tracks with the musicians, whereas today, you know, with computers and everything, you can do it from home if you wanted to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can. You know, instead of going into a studio and spending $50,000 or whatever it may be, you can do something with, you know, the internet, this, that. You can buy things. You go into your basement for like $10,000, record the same kind of sound.
Sure.
But getting back to what you're talking about, my first hit record, once again called Kissin' Time, that was done at 1405 Locust Street. It was a 2-track studio.
Wow.
It was just 2 tracks, 2 Ampex machines.
Reel to reel, right?
Reel to reel recording. Dave Apple, who did all of the arranging. Cal Mann did all of the writing. Bernie Lowe was the president of the company when they had to splice tapes and put it together. Like, if something was wrong, okay, we'll cut that out. Let's do it again, and we'll splice it together. And that's the studio where I recorded with Georgie Young and the Rockin' Box. That was Kissin' Time, 2-track studio. And, you know, if you had to overdub, you played on one reel, have the second reel spinning, and, you know, do a harmony part. There was no harmony part on Kissin' Time, but a lot of my records that I did harmony parts with 2 tracks.
Yeah.
Now, what necessitated when you would go to New York to Bell Sound and record?
Well, I think back then, Jim, it was still 2-track. You know, like my second record was a song called We Got Love after Kissin' Time. And Bernie Lowe, the president of Cameo, he just he wasn't happy with the bass sound. And Bernie would be like this in the studio, and he'd talk to Dave Apple, who's out, with the musicians. Dave, can't hear the bass, can't hear the bass. Bass sounds wrong, It's not coming through the board right, yada, yada, yada. Make a long story short, I think we went to Bell Sound, and we recorded We Got Love for 3 days at Bell Sound Studios. And the record went, 'cause you got one lucky fella, ba-doo-boom-too. And to make a long story short, the record that was released was the second recording of the first day. The other 2 days, Bernie was saying, I can't hear the bass, Dave. I can't hear the bass. And then he went back and listened, second recording, first day.
Yeah. Jim, many of the artists that are featured in the book, was the sound of Philadelphia and the artists like Bobby, there would be times when they would have to go out of Philadelphia to record. But from what you found in your research, was the majority of their work done here in Philadelphia, or did they have to go? I mean, we have great sound studios here, like
Absolutely.
Sigma Sound is another great
Absolutely.
studio.
Absolutely.
I mean, did they do the majority of their work here, or did they have to go to New York or LA to record?
The majority was done with Joe Tarsia and Sigma Sound.
Absolutely, yeah. And before that was Emil.
Emil Corson, yeah.
Emil Corson.
Yeah.
And Sigma Sound originally was called
Reco
Art.
Yeah.
How about that?
And Emil was the engineer and who owned the studio. Matter of fact, I recorded Wild One there, which was my first million seller. And I think somewhere in the track, if you listen carefully, you can hear a toilet flush.
Really?
Because they used to have the microphone 3 stories up in the bathroom for the reverb. They had the microphone in the bathroom that would go down into the studio. Right, for the whoa, 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 whoa. And I think if you listen carefully, you may hear a toilet flush.
I can see everybody now going into the attic or down into the basement and trying to find the record. And if they even have a record player to put it on, right?
Right.
Exactly. What's a record player?
A record player, a 45.
Yeah.
What is that? Yeah.
And then there were also artists like Michael Jackson, and I believe Cher also went to Sigma Sound to record at some. So while we think of it being a Philadelphia recording studio, there were international stars not from the area that would come here to work.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say Philadelphia International Records supplanted Motown in the 70s.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And because you had Lou Rawls came here, the Jacksons, the Jones Girls from Chicago. You had all these nationally known artists that came here because of the reputation of Gamble and Huff and Tom Bell.
I mean, you knew, when the needle dropped down on a 45 that it was a Motown record. Mm-hmm. You knew when the needle dropped down on a 45 that it was a Cameo or a Cameo Parkway record. Same thing with Gamble and Huff, when there were still 45s.
45, yeah. Not that they were all that old, you understand, right? That's for the audience at home.
Not
right?
at all.
In putting this book together, was there anybody or anything that you reached out to or wish you would had put in the book that you just weren't able to find or to locate?
Well, you're always going to have misgivings, and there's always going to be people that'll come up and say, "This is a good book, Jim. By the way, you don't have my picture in this book. How come?" But I think we got most of the groups, and then in the revised edition coming out in January, I added another 15 or 20 groups from the 70s and 80s progressive rock groups. But I got to tell you a funny story. When I first started doing the book, the initial book, Rock, Rhythm, Blues, with Charlie Gracie on the cover in 2004, Bobby might not remember this. We were talking on the phone, still almost 10 years ago, and I said, "Can you give me some commentary?" He says, "Yeah. Well, let me read to you first what I got on you, Bobby." So, like a proud pop, I read all this information, and I said, "So it's right?" And he goes, "No. What didn't I get right?" He says, "None of it."
Just what an author wants, what a writer wants to hear, right?
So then he set me straight, and then we talked football, and we've gotten along ever since.
Yeah, for sure. On the cover, on the cover of this book, and they're doing very well. Let's not jinx it here, but on the cover of this book, you have Daryl Hall and John Oates, which personified another style of music that they're known for. And on the back cover, you have Gamble and Huff. So it's sort of bookends this contemporary era of Philadelphia music.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did a wonderful job.
Well, thank you. Bless your heart.
From
Thank you.
beginning
Appreciate
to end, like you said, with the different eras that happened here in Philadelphia musically, Jim did a great job.
Anybody, maybe you don't want to name names, that didn't want to cooperate? Or I would think in a book like this where you're really highlighting something that is so...
There were a few that I won't mention because I can tell you the reasons. One person, for example, may have had bitter memories for some reason or not with regard to the recording industry and their experiences, despite the fact they had success. Another person didn't want to volunteer any information because they were doing a book and they felt it would delude what they were saying. When in actuality it wouldn't, but I respected that and I said, that's okay.
Yeah.
And then I put them in the book anyway.
Well, good for
No,
you.
but I paid homage and respect and had at least a photograph of them in the book and their bio if they didn't want to offer commentary.
Right.
But everybody was pretty good. I'd say we got a good cross section of people, and
I want to also mention that you pay tribute to many of the broadcasters who were and continue to be responsible for playing the music that is that it's out there today. And I mean, many of those artists, even still playing Bobby's records. I mean, that national anthem of summertime, Wildwood Days, is played every year, and it seems like on every Philadelphia radio station.
It definitely is the national anthem of Wildwood, New Jersey.
Yeah, for sure.
I got to tell you a funny story that involves Bobby. Ed Hurst, who I dearly love, and I grew up with Grady and Hurst because they preceded Bob Horn and Bandstand. They tried to get Grady and Hurst and Soul in the book to do the Bandstand show. They were already, ensconced.
Sure.
And they couldn't leave where they were. But I hope I get this right. Around 1960, Ed Hurst and Joe Grady doing Summertime on the Pier.
Right.
And they get the idea for promotion. Why don't we go to Cameo Records and ask Bernie Lowe and Bobby if they'll do a song about Steel Pier?
Absolutely.
So he announces on the air, if you send in a quarter, we will send you a one-sided recording of Bobby Rydell singing Steel Pier.
It was just a one-sided recording.
Right.
Yeah,
well,
and it was called Steel Pier.
George Hammett, the owner, gets wind of this, and he goes ballistic. He says, because he knew what was going to happen. He says, Ed, take that off the air. We can't have that. We can't. Mr. Hammett, we can't do that. We've already announced Bobby's going to do the recording. And within 3 weeks or a month, they got like 10 or 15,000 quarters in the mail.
Unbelievable.
And George Hammond had to go out and hire about 20 additional people to process all the quarters. And send out records.
It was a pretty damn good record.
I never even realized it was a song about Steel Pier.
It went something like Steel Pier, where the dancing's groovy. Steel Pier, with the swinging bands. Steel Pier, and there's lots of movies. Steel Pier, and just for holding hands. You watch the horses die from a high above. I couldn't help it, had to fall in love. Where? Steel Pier, pop, pop, pop.
Wow.
It's a great record. It really was.
If the people in Atlantic City were smart, and whoever's owning Steel Pier today, they should bring that back. So you have Wildwood covered and you have Steel Pier covered.
Got it covered.
You just got to come up with Avalon and Kate May. Al Alberts had the Kate May thing done, right?
It was Al and I guess Cozy.
Yeah, Cozy. Yeah,
God rest his soul, Cozy Morley.
Yeah, for sure.
On the way to Cape May.
Oh yeah. Those are those songs that become part of our summer tradition here in Philadelphia. Again, the name of the book is Philly Pop Rock, Rhythm, and Blues. If you are a fan of Philadelphia music, even if you aren't a fan, this is a must-read. And it not only gets into many of the stories, the backstories of all the artists, but you can even see some of the photos of your favorite disc jockeys who were responsible for playing this music. And many of them are still on the air, and I think that says a lot about broadcasting in Philadelphia, is that many of these people who are legends like Bobby in broadcasting are still on the air, still playing the music. I mean, Jerry Blavat, your good friend, still playing the music the way he wants to play the music.
Yeah. I think at one time Jerry said to whoever his program manager was, this is what I'm going to play. And if you don't like it, then, you know, get rid of me.
Yeah.
But this is the music I want to play. You know, I'm not going to play something that's whatever it may have been, a top 10, a top 5. This was Jerry's music, and Jerry liked what he wanted to play. And that was his, you know, his protocol. And Jerry's still very, very successful doing what he did way back when he was on, what was it, WCAM in Camden, New Jersey. Yeah.
And even Pat Delsey is mentioned in the book too.
Pat Delsey.
Yeah,
You know,
Pat,
from
great guy.
WCAM and WSSJ.
Ed Hurst, I did an interview with him 3 weeks ago. He still does a show called Steel Pure.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, God bless him. He's a wonderful man.
Terrific.
A wonderful man, Ed Hurst. You know, going back, like Jim said, you talk about those people. You know, Ed Hurst. Ed Hurst. And Joe Niagara, Tom Donahue, Bill Wright Sr. My God, all of the great jockeys we had, you know, back then. High Lit, you know,
for sure.
My God, it was what a wonderful era. I mean, you turn the radio on today, I don't know what the hell I'm listening to.
I can't understand the lyrics.
Oh,
To be
forget
continued,
about
yeah, for sure.
To be continued.
I want people to go out and pick up a copy of the book, Philly Pop Rock, Rhythm and Blues, a look back at the musical history of Philadelphia by James Rosin. I want to thank Jim and the wonderful Bobby Rydell for being with us on this edition of the Philly Factor. Until the next time, have a great day.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much.